Some films were harmed in the making of this podcast. Hello and welcome to For Your Consideration, the podcast featuring roundtable discussions reevaluating the cinematic canon of past masterpieces and modern classics.
I'm your host, Dustin.
And I'm Mike Josick.
Welcome to the show.
This week on the podcast, we're going to be talking about Christopher Nolan's 2000 suspense thriller noir classic, Memento.
AKA that movie where the only thing he can't forget is that he can't remember.
So just before we get into the movie, we wanted to give another shout-out to another comment that we received on our YouTube channel. Getting a lot of love on our YouTube channel. Not sure why things are so dry on the iTunes and the other social media, but anyway, the comment is from listener Simba Trey and was regarding the audio commentary for Prometheus that I did with the guest host at the time, Shannon Williams. And Simba said, "Please do more, watched whole thing, love you guys." Simple, to the point, but it is a genuine comment and deserves the shout-out it has coming to it. So thanks, Simba. Going to try and get Shannon back to do some more commentaries. We'll see what happens. And Dustin will also get some commentaries going. We haven't really done many commentaries this year so far, you and me.
This year, I don't know that we've done any unless Troll 2 is this year. I have a very bad sense of time.
No, we haven't done a single commentary this year. I thought we might have because we've talked about doing Meet the Feebles. And we've talked about doing Night of the Living Dead.
There's a lot of talk going on.
Hey, we've been putting out weekly episodes for several months.
And I've been working out of town for a year?
I think so.
I don't live at home. I live in a hotel.
But we had discussed on our year-end show about what we were kind of hoping to get into as we moved forward with the podcast, and we did kind of plan to do more commentaries. So we're kind of booked till the end of the year right now with what we're planning with all of our episodes. But
if we can keep that buffer up, it'll give us more time to do these commentaries.
And to be fair, just to plug the Patreon campaign, one of the reward tiers is that Dustin and I will do a custom audio commentary for whichever film you want if you are a Patreon supporter at that reward level. So,
and possibly a Memento version of this very review.
We have also, yes, we've discussed that. Maybe we'll touch on that again at the end of the show. But let's move into the credits for the film. Memento was directed by Christopher Nolan, produced by Suzanne Todd and Jennifer Todd. Screenplay was by Christopher Nolan, based on technically it was based on an idea for a short story by Jonathan Nolan, but the short story Memento Mori was eventually published, so they're kind of intertwined that way.
And it's not related to the Japanese film Memento Mori, which is completely different.
And we're kind of sending the credits off the rails here, so I'm going to get back to it. It stars Guy Pearce, Carrie-Ann Moss, and Joe Pantoliano, also known as Joey Pants. Music was by David Julian. Cinematography was by Wally Pfister. It was edited by Dodie Dorn. It was distributed by Newmarket Films and released on September 5th, 2000 at the Venice Film Festival, with a wide release on March 16th, 2001 in the United States. The film is very well regarded amongst critics and fans. It's on a lot of varied, diverse lists of top 50 greatest independent films, greatest screenplays, best editing, greatest movies of all time, best movies of the 2000s. But since there's no official AFI or BFI, we're not going to list any of those right now.
Also because there's honestly 20 different things that it's listed in.
But what we will list is where it sits on the Sight and Sound,
where it is 894th on the critics poll.
So with that out of the way, as we always do, Dustin, let's start with what you think of Memento.
I had actually forgotten a few of the subplots in Memento when I went into it, but I was very interested in seeing how it all played out again, and this time coming in just being super nitpicky about everything to see if it would still stand up. One of the big things that I see written down on anything that pokes any hole in this movie is, how does he remember that he can't remember?
That's what I've run across too.
And they talk about whether or not you can learn sort of procedural things, the whole muscle memory thing. People with complete anterograde amnesia, they can do things like run mazes faster just through sort of an instinctual thing. In theory, you could say that, no, I can't even figure it out how that would work. But that's pretty much the only way you could make anything in the movie work, the fact that he's able to tell people these stories, that he can remember this. Otherwise, he certainly wouldn't be able to go out and spend his entire life trying to hunt down his wife's killer / rapist.
And the payoff of that storyline, in my opinion, is actually the best part of the whole movie, when you find out kind of just how deep that goes.
Absolutely. One thing that I adore about the film is that not only is Joey Pants coming in and sort of using him for his own gain, but Carrie-Ann Moss is sort of doing the exact same thing at the same time, and everyone's playing him. And he, at the beginning, goes on so much about memory and how it's flawed and you can't trust it. When it comes to why he trusts his patterned writings, I write down all this stuff. This is the stuff I trust. This is the only thing I can trust. And people use that against him. You can't trust anything.
One of my favorite parts of this movie, possibly my favorite part of the movie, is when Teddy, Joey Pants, is telling him, we caught the guy. We caught the guy like a year ago. You killed him, and then you forgot about it. And he's like, I just wanted to see you happy again. and
this time, I thought we could make a little money off of it, too, you know? $200,000.
And I really liked that idea that, I mean, he does say earlier in the film, it doesn't matter if I don't remember, my wife deserves vengeance. But
you've got a few things working there, because certainly at the end, he's talking about, I still have to be able to make a difference. Like, I have to have meaning. And if the only thing he can remember is vengeance, that's the only thing that he can do to give himself meaning. And it's the fact all that he has left.
The fact that he can't remember it the next day, there's a tragedy in that. There's this, he's stuck in this loop. And
the thing is, the only thing he ever remembers from 2 seconds before is his wife being raped and murdered. That's not even a true memory. Once again, going back to how you can't trust your memories, because that memory is incomplete. But that is all he can remember. That is the last thing he remembers. So it is going to be at the beginning of every thought he has every day for the rest of his life. The only thing he could ever think about is vengeance. It is a definite tragedy. Take that, Hamlet.
This is Christopher Nolan's first feature film, and I think he kind of came out of the gate. It's just gangbusters. I mean, I really like this film. I've only ever watched it twice. This was my second viewing, and
likewise,
I felt like it held up. I kind of wonder if maybe it held up because it's been so many years since I've last seen it. I wonder if this is a movie, you know, like Fight Club, where you can sit down and you can watch it like 4 times in a row and still be sort of finding out more intricacies and weird webs of conspiracy and intrigue. But I really think this is kind of the proto-Nolan that we know now. I mean, he's working with Wally Pfister, who continues to be his cinematographer, working with his brother Jonathan, or working off an idea by his brother Jonathan, which he and Jonathan have collaborated on other films since then. And, you know, he's become much more refined, and he's become much more stylistic. And the only word I can really think of is his movies, even if you stay away from the plot complexities of most Christopher Nolan movies, the movies themselves just have a density to them. They have an atmosphere to them that is kind of like signature Nolan now. And this movie, like I said, I feel very much that it's proto-Nolan. I feel that it's somebody who's kind of feeling their way around, and I don't feel that density in this movie, but I see the beginnings of it. Like, I feel that Insomnia, which I think was the movie that he made after Memento, I think Insomnia has more of that prototypical Nolan-esque stuff in it than this movie does.
The comparison movies that are coming to my mind are actually the Dark Knight trilogy, and I'm like, I don't think that's quite as dense or as complex as Memento is.
No, when I say density, I was saying, like I said, if you stay away from plot complexities, there's a visual density. Like there's an atmosphere to Christopher Nolan's movies. They move a certain way, they're paced a certain way, the way they're shot, the way they're lit, the way the camera moves, the way he frames things. Like there's just, this movie's a lot more frantic, or at least it gives off the impression of being a lot more frantic than stuff that he's done more recently.
Well, if it's more frantic, you got to look at Lenny's life. It is going to be frantic. The one scene, my favorite beginning of one of his memories, is of course just him running and him asking himself, okay, what am I doing? Oh, am I chasing this guy? Whoop, nope, he's chasing me. That's his life is frantic.
That's contender for possibly my favorite scene with the other scene that I mentioned earlier.
I actually like a lot of the little things that he does, a lot of the little hints that I didn't notice before. The bitterness of Natalie towards him in a few of the scenes, calling him Lenny, knowing just to piss him off because she knows he killed her boyfriend. He doesn't know that. So she's just being a little bit of a dick, just poking and prodding at a few little areas just because she can, knowing that she can get away with it. The fact that Teddy's constantly trying to switch cars with him because all he wants to do right now is get that money. Even though he'll try to get Leonard out of the city at the same time, he wants to get that money. He wants to get that evidence gone. And all of that I started to see the second time through because I knew what they knew. While at the same time, you've also got the movie playing from both ends, moving towards the middle, the forward stuff being in black and white, backwards being in color.
If I've given any impression that I don't like this movie, I really like this movie. And structurally, I love it. I think it's incredibly clever. I think, there was a video online where Christopher Nolan spends 18 minutes. You know what? I'm going to link to it and post it on the Facebook page. You guys can check it out when this episode is live. It's 18 minutes of Christopher Nolan explaining the narrative structure of the film. And he draws a hairpin on a chalkboard and he starts showing you, where this goes and that goes and how things meet. And then there's this other long-term memory that's in the distance and they don't specify kind of how far back it is. And there's so much thought put into the construction of it. But I do kind of feel like maybe this movie hangs a little too much on that construction. I think this movie might be a little too deliberate, if you know what I mean.
Did a lot of stuff just too convoluted, even though it was sort of planned.
Not convoluted.
His switching clothing, which seems a little bit odd, which is the thing that gets him the coaster that he uses to meet up with Natalie, which sets that whole section into motion, because you have all these pieces from before when they're going after this guy that you don't know about. Why did he switch the clothes? Presumably to keep evidence off of his own person, but then he has the evidence of the dead person's clothes on him. That doesn't make much sense. It seems a kind of a weird way to get that on there, to get the coaster in his pocket.
There are some things in the movie that seem to be in the movie for the sake of the structure and the conceit of the movie. If he can't remember anything past the death of his wife, like you said, how can he remember that he has this condition?
And how is he not panicking every single time he wakes up? I can understand that you wouldn't be in adrenaline because your body can't keep doing that. Or would it? Would it be because your memory's like that? Would you be in a constant state of panic?
And I think it's to the credit of Nolan as a filmmaker, Guy Pearce, Joey Pants, and Carrie-Ann Moss as performers, that most of those things don't really hit you until after the fact. Like, the movie does sweep you up in its
flow, in its river.
Yeah, you're basically, the film is a construction, and you spend, almost 2 hours sort of existing in this construct, and Nolan kind of guides you around and shows you what he wants to show you and very deliberately reveals or chooses not to reveal certain things, and you're along for the ride. And it's a great ride. This is a great film.
But the fridge logic is where it fails. That you just saw the movie and you're like, wow, that was a good movie, and you walk over to the fridge, and while you're doing that, you're like, wait a second, this doesn't seem to fit. Which is what fridge logic is, in case I refer to it in the future.
Now, to be fair, our conceit in this podcast is to basically embrace fridge logic. We're supposed to, try and tear the movie down a little bit to see if it can stand up to a little scrutiny. And for the most part, I do think that Memento does.
It has a very compelling story of Leonard just taking what he's going through and how he's affected by others around him and what his thought process is as he tries to piece this stuff together. The reason why he turns himself against Teddy in order to try to maintain his image of self, which is a little bit ironic because he's stuck in the past in terms of where his memory is. He wants to...
Are you talking about the scene right at the end?
Yeah, the scene right at the end. He's trying to maintain who he was in the past while simultaneously trying to affect the future and give himself a meaning. And I don't know if that made any sense the way I said it, but there's something there.
It's a moment.
My tongue.
It's a moment where Lenny is making a choice unlike any other choice he makes in any other part of the film.
The entire thing is about getting that vengeance, but this is the one time when he chooses to deliberately and knowingly go against that.
By burning those pictures, by burning those Polaroids and writing down just the act.
He knew he was killing Teddy. He knew he was setting himself up to hunt down Teddy. He knew this. And
he said, "You're a John G." and wrote down the license plate number and made sure he got a tattoo of it. And I mean, technically it's the middle of the film, but it's a compelling place to end it, and it is the most kind of aggressively proactive
personal growth.
Not personal growth, but like a choice that he is making for himself. Because he basically reacts and bounces around like a pinball in a pinball machine.
Allowing and everyone else uses that to their advantage. And this is the one time when he says, screw you to everything he knows, which is just Teddy at this point.
And he has his overarching revenge plot. But yeah, like you said, like this is the one moment where he's like, this is what I want. And he chooses to set a chain of events in motion that ends at the beginning of the film.
And that gives him that purpose for the next day or two, however long it is. Regardless of what happens afterwards, he doesn't care anymore. He just wants to have that purpose back for that little bit.
And it creates a scenario where you just heard Lenny talking to Teddy, where Teddy said, we got revenge. We took care of it, and you forgot. And we did it again, and you forget. So he got mad.
Teddy's getting bored of this. This is old to him now.
He got mad at Teddy. He set the events in motion that would basically end in the end of Teddy's existence. So what happens to Lenny now?
You've got drug dealers who are going to be after him because Natalie knows about this and she is looking for a fall guy. You've got the police who are going to be coming after him because now you've got 2 dead bodies and people are eventually going to find that. Especially since, as somebody with complete anterograde amnesia, he may or may not cover his tracks super well.
Which is actually something that Teddy was concerned about.
That's why Teddy's constantly following him around, making sure that the tracks are covered as best as he can.
He's like, hey, we gotta get rid of this car.
Well, it wasn't about getting rid of the car. It was about the 200 G's in the back.
Well, that too. But I mean, I think he said, like, you've been around here too long. He's like, you can't...
Yeah, he said repeatedly.
You can't hang around like this. Which I think he's referring to the clothes and the car.
That he absolutely is at that point.
It also explains how Lenny's been kind of paying for everything because he was paying for 2 hotel rooms. He's paid for a couple of tattoos.
Also, $40 a night? That is a cheap hotel room.
Well, this is 17 years ago. We don't know where it is. And I mean, it wasn't like a high-class hotel.
As somebody who's been in some dives as of late...
One thing that I kind of noticed about this movie, the score is very subdued. And, you know, so many of Nolan's movies going into his, the Dark Knight films, The Prestige, Inception. You know, there's just these big scores, like the music. And that might also be why I feel like his films have a density to them that maybe... Memento is lacking a little bit.
You've got a density to you.
But I know you don't really notice music. Like, do you even remember any music in the movie?
The only thing I remember about the music is when Bowie came on at the end and you specifically pointed that out in the end credits.
Now, I do think it's kind of to the movie's credit because they do say, you know, when special effects and music, when you don't notice them, then they're doing their work. But
I tend to notice them when they're failing. That is how I do it.
But it was kind of strange watching it and having no sense of music, except for there was one scene where the scene where he kicks in the door in the wrong room.
That was great.
Because there was kind of a pulsing rhythm sort of building up to it, and then it sort of lost its momentum, and then it kind of built up again as he goes to the next room, to Dodd's room. But
honestly, that could be a very telling scene, just a reminder that you can't trust your memory. You can't trust your perception either.
That's the only scene in the whole movie that I remember there being any music at all, except for when the end credits, and I was like, hey, it's Bowie. So I'm not sure how I feel about that. And I'm not sure that's anything that you can really speak to, because it's it's not something that you really watch for.
The only soundtrack that's ever really stood out to me was in Silent Hill, because huge fan, and I heard all the songs that I remembered.
They used the game music.
Pretty much.
It was a pretty brilliant move, actually.
Oh, absolutely.
On Gans's part. But
lots of failures elsewhere, but...
Other than just throwing out that, love the fact that Wally Pfister was a cinematographer on this movie, and I really enjoyed the photography and the lighting of it, and it was just seeing these two guys kind of at the beginning of their collaboration and knowing where they're going to go with it, and just kind of getting a little bit of giddy joy out of it. Other than that, I have nothing else to say about the film.
So you're saying we should move on to the judgment section?
I was leaving that open in case you were like, I do have something to say about the film.
It is often rare that I do, and if so, I tend to put it in the judgment section anyway.
All right. So let's close off the discussion segment, and let's move on to the judgment segment of our program. Dustin, Memento, museum piece or masterpiece?
Normally I come into these with a very certain answer. This is one of the rare exceptions where I'm really on the fence.
That gives me so much joy because I'm certain. And the fact that you're on the fence, it's like role reversal.
I knew coming into it that fridge logic is the place where this movie suffers. But while watching it, I was also doing a bit of research myself, and a lot of the stuff that I considered odd fridge logic could actually be entirely legitimate. So I'm not sure if that's just my own ignorance creating all these potential issues with the writing aspect of it. Everything else, however, I think is extremely well done. Well paced, good ways to get the information out that we need. I will always question, like everyone will, how did he remember that he couldn't remember? But suspending that little amount of disbelief made for an excellent film that was mainstream yet had such an artistic way of being told. The concept of telling a story backwards and forwards, meeting at the middle, that's not something you're going to see every day, and certainly not something you're going to see everybody love. A lot of people I know, they look at anything that's artsy or that would have a confusing sort of narrative like this and just be entirely turned off. And the thing is, it's not a confusing narrative.
At the time, there were people who left the theater who were like, I'm entertained, but I couldn't tell you what happened.
And yet anybody I've known who's seen it, and any review that I've heard, has been splendid for it. And so, while I might be on the borderline simply because of the fridge logic thing, I think that might be steeped in my own ignorance, and I'm going to go with masterpiece.
You're worried that might be the pedantic asshole bubbling to the surface?
Yes. I think it might be some sort of, I think I know better, when I'm in fact wrong.
I'm a little surprised. I'm a little surprised that we got a museum piece out of you on this one.
I said masterpiece.
I'm surprised. I'm surprised that we got a masterpiece out of you on this one.
I hope you're not going to edit that and save yourself.
I honestly didn't think that you were going to go there. As I said, in summation, I really like this movie. I've always liked this movie. It's one of my favorite DVDs that I have at home. I've got the deluxe with all the great features and packaging.
Have you seen it in forward yet?
You know what? I'm going home at the end of this week, and I'm going to grab the DVD and I'm going to bring it back when I come back. Because if I'm not mistaken, I think there's a feature on the DVD where you can actually watch the film in chronological order, where it branches it, which has me super curious. So
honestly, that would be an interesting watch, and to the credit of the movie, to be able to watch a movie where it's cut into pieces and put into a different order and still have a full, complete movie. I'd like to hear whether or not it's it's something worth watching were it not for this movie itself? Could you go in and just watch Memento in chronological order, and would it still be a good movie without this to compare it to? That's going to be a hard thing to try and think about while you're watching it.
But getting back to my summary, I do like this movie quite a bit. I think there's a lot of really clever things in it. I love the chase scene. I love the transition when the two timelines come together and it fades from black and white to color through the development of a Polaroid. I love the performances. I love the editing. I love the structure of it. But ultimately, I feel that this movie is more style and structure than it is story. And I was having kind of trouble with it because I do remember this movie fondly. But I do think that Nolan has made better films and has made films that I would be more comfortable putting on the list or into the canon of the greatest films of all time than Memento. I think this is a really, really strong, compelling, interesting first shot out of the gate, but I am going to go museum piece on this one.
I'm actually wondering if this is a first, because normally I'm the guy who's a bit more negative on films, and I'll be the museum when you're the masterpiece.
And I was actually debating too, because our conversation was starting to wear down. I mean, this process of talking about the movies after we watch them, you come out with a position and then you start thinking about it in other ways. And
before seeing it again, I was coming in museum.
I didn't know what I was going to vote when I came in, but I think that ultimately for me, what's putting Memento in the museum piece position is the fact that it is supposed to be a noir thriller. It is supposed to be. It's a different take on a genre that we're familiar with, but I feel it's maybe a little more style than substance, even though I do really, really like it.
Whereas I think that the substance is there, and although it probably won't be as good without the style...
The substance is the style. The medium is the message.
That doesn't hurt it.
And I'd be totally comfortable revisiting this movie down the line and possibly changing my judgment of it. But as it stands right now, I'm going to sit with museum piece, and perhaps another Nolan movie will come down the pike, and we'll see what happens then.
We'll fight over it. That's what'll happen.
So that's one vote for masterpiece from Dustin, and one vote for museum piece from myself for Christopher Nolan's 2000 film Memento.
Are you sure you want this?
Have I told you what this man did?
Yeah.
Well, then you shouldn't have to ask.
But even if you get revenge, you're not going to remember it. You're not even going to know that it happened.
My wife deserves vengeance. Doesn't make any difference whether I know about it. Just because there are things I don't remember doesn't make my actions meaningless. The world doesn't just disappear when you close your eyes, does it? Anyway, maybe I'll take a photograph to remind myself. Get another freaky tattoo.
Now, if you have any opinions on what we've discussed or the show in general, you can find us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. We're on WordPress. We've got a blog there, wordpress.com/FYC show. If you download the show off of iTunes, we'd love it if you rated and reviewed us. And if you know anybody...
have a secret email that apparently we forgot for 2 years?
We do have an email, which we haven't really been advertising, which is fycshowmail@gmail.com if you want to send us an email. We have the shows on iHeartRadio and Stitcher if you know anybody who uses those providers. And we also have a YouTube channel, as we pointed out on this episode with Simba Trey's lovely comment about our Prometheus auto commentary, which you can also find.
A home address, which we will not be revealing. So hopefully we won't find any mail.
And lastly, there's the Patreon account, which we also mentioned at the top of the show. If you want to support the show, if you like what we're doing and you want to see us get bigger and bolder, hit patreon.com/FYC show. We have some cool reward tiers there that you can check out. We kind of discussed the possibility that a Patreon reward on this episode might possibly be editing it together Memento style, which might be a fun exercise. We'll see what happens. We'll see...
We'll see if one of you forces him to do it at some point.
We'll see how we get along with that, yeah. If you don't want to support us financially but still want to support the show, just share the Patreon page on your social media, let other people know it's out there, and that is doing us a solid. So, thanks so much. And that pretty much brings us to a wrap of this episode of For Your Consideration. Thanks so much for joining us. We appreciate your support. Love the fact that you're downloading us and listening to us wherever you may be. Be sure to join us next week when we'll have another episode where Dustin and I discuss another classic example of cinema.
That, or we'll just watch a bunch of YouTube videos and comment on those.
Why? Be more constructive, Dustin.
You try to introduce something new, and this is the thanks you get.
So that's it for us. I'm your host, Mike.
And I'm Dustin.
Take care.
Ta-ta. AKA that movie where he can't remember anything.
And that's it.
Sorry. I had the wording in my head.